What do you think about at night?
What do I think of? Well, I have to say right off the bat, not to start off on a negative perspective, I do concerned about the direction of America. I'd like to see us turn a corner here and get back to some of the original values that this country was founded on. But I do have the problem sometimes sleeping because I can't turn my brain off.
You can't turn your brain off. And what's your method of going to sleep?
Now since I've kind of pulled back from my day job, I just go until I drop. And then I fall asleep, typically at 1 or 2 a.m.
What time do you wake up?
9 o'clock.
Are you reading like nonstop or
no? I read a lot. I read a lot of science papers. I read books on history, on science, the areas of science I'm interested in. I'm a college dropout, but I was majoring in geology. I studied mathematics, history, astronomy, things like that. And I kind of, I had a company going at the time, and so that was just really taking off. And then my younger brother showed up here. And so we decided to expand our business. We're third generation carpenter builders. Our father was a house builder, carpenter, master carpenter. His dad, from Sweden, he was a master carpenter. So we came up into trades. I wasn't planning to start out becoming a carpenter. But I got into my early 20s, excuse me. And then, I decided, I probably need to find something to earn a living that's legal. So I kind of fell back on my old skills that I had learned as a teenager and decided that, I'd worked a lot of different jobs. And I like being outside. I like being my own boss. And I thought, I can do this for a while. And then as I got into it, the more I began to really love the craft. And it was challenging.
The craft of what? Of being a geomorphologist?
No, the craft of being a carpenter.
Okay, got it.
Because, you think a carpenter, you picture somebody out there nailing subfloor or whatever with a pneumatic power nailer. And it's way more than that. And when you go back into some of the older skill sets, of previous generations, what some of these guys were doing was amazing. You go back and, like, for example, you look at some of the geometry in a church steeple. Right. And if you want to go back 600, 700, 800 years to like the Gothic cathedrals, it depended on carpentry work because you cannot build a stone vault without having forming. And that was all the carpenters. And the thing is you see the masonry work, but you don't see the carpentry work after because once the masonry is up and set, all of the scaffolding and formwork comes down. Right. So you don't appreciate how incredibly complex some of these ancient carpentry skills were.
I noticed my drill sergeant in the Army, who was a leader amongst leaders, tough guy, but we all respected. He was a Freemason 32nd degree himself. Drill sergeant, first sergeant Ward. And he knew how to get all these big personality guys, and we used to sit there and listen to me. He was a leader. I noticed you're also a 32nd degree Freemason, if I'm not mistaken.
I went through the degrees of the Scottish Rite. Now, this is going back into the this would have been in the 1980s. I've not been an active Scottish Rite Mason.
So when's the last time you were active with, Freemason?
Just before COVID.
Just before COVID.
Yeah, I stayed active in what's called the Blue Lodge.
Okay.
Now, the Blue Lodge is sort of the core of the whole system of Freemasonry, and that's where you go through the apprentice degree, the craftsman degree, and the master's degree. You have to get that third degree under your belt, and then you've got the metaphor that I would use to describe it is you're entering this big temple or hall, and you've got this vestibule or outer court, and it takes 3 steps to get up into that outer court. That's the Blue Lodge. Once you've gone in there and you've mastered that, now there's about 4 or 5 other doors that you can access that lead you into these realms of deeper study and ritual and ceremony and all, which is the way the method and the knowledge is preserved and inculcated is primarily through ceremony.
Now, the highest degree is 33rd, if I'm not mistaken,
correct.
Right? So 32nd degree is, for someone to become a 32nd degree with Freemason, what does it take? How many years does it take to get there?
It doesn't, it's changed. It's become a lot easier from what it used to be.
Tell me about the difficult days, like what it was before to become one.
Oh, it took years. It took years. Now, I went through the stages. I became master of a Blue Lodge, and generally that takes 7 years. And you start out and you go from what's called a junior steward to senior steward, junior deacon to senior deacon, junior warden to senior warden, and then finally you're in the master's chair. It sits in the east. I did it in 6 years because somebody ahead of me in the lineup dropped out, so I kind of leapfrogged over one of the stations. But I wanted to do that because there was so much content and so much in those first three, and they're the core of everything that follows.
Now, you started off, the reason why I asked the question, because you're like carpentry, and then you said the masonry work, and then, math. And to me, like I remember when I'm on the Freemason side, you're a lot about geometry.
Yes.
So what, as you're advancing, I've had a lot of friends that were Scientologists, and it was always about the next one and the next one and the next one. And it was always opening a new level of thing or course or something they're going to be learning, right? Mm-hmm. What was, as you advanced, what things were you learning where like, well, I never knew about this. That's fascinating. And then boom, that's very interesting. What was it that kept you wanting to learn more? What were you learning at each level?
Well, because I began to realize that it had applications to many facets of life. And I was just, I was incessantly curious. And so I discovered, that there was geometry. For example, that's the letter G in Freemasonry, is geometry.
Is it geometry or is it Genesis? Genesis creation, or is it geometry?
Geometry.
Okay.
Geometry. And you see the symbol is a compass, which you draw circles with, and a square. The compass is in the square. Those are the two instruments of geometry. So you've got those juxtaposed, and then you've got the G in the center. Sometimes you've got the all-seeing eye, but it's usually the G, and that stands for geometry. And in the early 70s, I was, exploring different spiritual paths, and I was studying under a Brahmin priest at the time, and I was very interested in ritual and how ritual was a vehicle for perpetuating information and knowledge. Okay, so I was learning Brahmin rituals from this guy, and he had a Swami that he was studying under. So through this doctor of Sanskrit, he was a professor of Sanskrit, but he was also a Brahmin priest, and through him I was connected with this Himalayan Swami, and we did a retreat in northern Minnesota, the North Woods of Minnesota, back in 1971 and again in 1972. And in 1972, this group had grown around this guy, and we decided to do a retreat, and we needed an assembly building, and we needed a place for the Swami to stay. So there was an architect in the group, and he designed two, you remember the geodesic domes, the Buckminster Fuller domes that were real. People were building those things back in the day. It fell out of popularity because they always leaked. It was hard to keep them from leaking, and they were kind of impractical. Let's see. Somewhere online, there's even pictures of the ones that. So my brothers and I, we got sort of drafted because we had the most carpentry experience in the group. And I remember one of the domes was designed on the geometry of an Islamic mosque. And I remember figuring that out and, trying to learn some of the geometry. Let's see. So one of them actually had a dome on it. It was actually designed like a dome, and then it came to a spire at the top. Kind of along the lines what you're seeing right there.
Okay.
Well, anyways, it was very challenging but fun to figure out the geometry. This is 1972, summer of 1972. And then they...
So this fellow you're working with, he's not a Freemason. You're just learning about this stuff, or he is a Freemason?
No.
He's not?
He's not.
So you're just at this point interested in this, you're fascinated by this, with this gentleman that's, kind of mentoring you and walking you through this.
Yeah, there was the architect who designed them, and then we had to figure out how to build them. And so it's all triangles that are fitted together, and it's all geometry. So that's kind of where my fascination with geometry really took root. Then the one of the domes, the one that was with the spire on top, that was featured in a national publication called Shelter. Big format like this, and we got a whole page devoted to that. And then in that, it was basically about how different cultures and different peoples, indigenous peoples and so on, how they solve the problem of of existing in their environment through architecture. So it was everything from like a yurt, something as simple as a yurt, all the way up to a Gothic cathedral and everything in between. And so is that the shelter right there that Rob has got? Let's see. No, that's not the one. But there is a publication out there. They reprinted it fairly recently. Rob, if you put in shelter, maybe book, that's all it's called, a shelter. Anyways, we were featured in there, and that's it right there. That's it. That's the one. Yeah, so we're in that. And one of the domes that we built is in there. I don't remember what page it was on, but if there's an index, it's called the Bindu Dome. Bindu Dome. So I acquired, because of the fact that our project was featured in there, I acquired that book, and it was filled with, there it is. That's it. If you zoom in, let's see. Yeah, that's the whole design. So see, me and my brothers figured out how to frame that thing in wood. And if you look at the picture up there immediately to the left of that, the guy standing up there with the nail apron, there's two of them. That's my younger brother right there. He's my business. That guy right there. That's Rowan, my younger brother. And he and I are partners right now and have been partners.
And you guys built this?
Yeah, well, we were lead carpenters.
Okay. And when you first built this, was this like a big deal that nobody could pull off at the time?
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay.
Pretty much,
Very interesting. So your interest with carpentry, how do you get recruited to Freemason? Like, how does that process take place?
Well, because as I started studying into the history of building and architecture, I kept seeing over and over again Freemasons and their involvement. That's what led to it. And then by 1978, I was really curious about it, and I also discovered, there was a lot of spiritual symbolism and things like that involved that like added this whole other dimension to it. And then just right around the time I met my wife, in fact, where she was living, her next door neighbor was a Freemason. And so I got to know him, and he introduced me to a buddy of his who was writing a book at the time, who was also a Freemason. And one of the criteria to become a Mason is you have to have two Masons in good standing vouch for you, and then they sign your petition. You have to make, and I'll mention that Freemasons are not permitted to solicit. You don't do that because the impetus has to come from the candidate. So in other words, if you're interested in becoming a Freemason, you
have to go.
You have to seek them out.
Got it. Interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting. So it's not like anything else where somebody disciples and invites you and there's an invitation or calling or anything like that. If you're interested, you'll find it. Yeah. So, okay. So why do you think, when you look at the history of people that when they, became presidents, Freemasons, George Washington, Andrew Jackson, Monroe, LBJ, FDR, Buchanan, Garfield, Teddy Roosevelt, Taft, Harding, Ford, even the honorary, you got Reagan, even Clinton when he was a kid, he was part of a Freemason, a certain program. Right, he was part of that. Why do you think so many presidents we can go Gerald Ford? What was the advantage that they had? What did they teach you there that helps you become a president?
I would say that I will also mention LBJ never went past the apprentice degree.
Okay.
He never made it to master.
Who was the highest ranking out of all of these presidents, by the way? Who made it to 33?
That's a good question. I did know that once upon a time, and I don't remember the names right offhand. But yeah, I think if you count up, I think there were, it's controversial whether Jefferson was. I think he probably was. I think he was initiated under the Grand Lodge of France when he was in France. But then the French Revolution came along, and all the records were destroyed. So there's no proof that he was a Freemason. However, I've read a lot of Jefferson's work, and there are certain very idiosyncratic, I'll say, turns of speech and things that are in the ceremonies that are recognizable to other Freemasons. And some of those have showed up in some of his writings that I've read, which leads me to suspect that he was an initiate in the craft. But, there were, by my counts, there were about 14 presidents who were Freemasons. And the last one who was a full, Master Mason was Gerald Ford.
Really, Gerald Ford was a Master Mason. Interesting.
Yes, let's see. He was
33rd degree. Yes.
Yeah, there he is. There's nobody after Ford, is there? Is there anybody showing?
No.
No, yeah,
it's just honorary. Reagan was an honorary. But what is the advantage? What is the edge that you get when you're in it that helps you become a president? I mean, it's not like
it's a method of mental and mind cultivation, mind development, and it's also requires. I'm sure very much like the military, it requires discipline. Focused discipline and dedication to goals. So you learn that. You learn this discipline. If you become a master, like I said, it takes a lot of work to become a high-ranking Mason. And so to get to that stage, you've had to cultivate self-discipline and also the mental training is extremely powerful and valuable. And that was one of the things that I really got out of it was, I went in, I guess the longest thing I'd ever memorized was the Gettysburg Address by Lincoln. But then when I get into Freemasonry, the way it works is, you think of it this way, think of it as a play with actors, and all of the officers, like say in the Blue Lodge, are actors, right? So you go in and you're a candidate, and it's like you're participating in a mystery play, a drama. And of course, you don't know what's going on, so you're just passively led through the whole thing. But then you have to go through the series of rigorous tests to show that you've learned. So think of it this way. If you go into the Blue Lodge, there's a whole series. You've got what's called the Entered Apprentice degree, the Fellowcraft degree, and then the Master's degree. Each one of those has what's called a catechism. And what the catechism does is it's a series of questions and answers that guide you through everything that you did in this ritual. Now, the ritual, think of it as a play in 3 acts with, say, 7 actors and then the candidate. So there'd be a total of 8, right? And then what happens is you're led in, you go through Act 1 of the play, and then you have to learn this catechism and master it to a pretty high degree of proficiency. And what that is, it's like the equivalent of learning the parts, the key parts of the actors in the play. And as you go through, the way the system is set up, it's quite ingenious. When I became an officer in the lodge, I went into what's called the junior steward, which is the lowest officer. You don't have a lot to do, but you go to the and you see the degree work, as it's called, and it's like you're watching the play over and over again. Then the second year, when you move up to senior steward, now you become a more active participant in the play. But you've had a whole year where you've been watching it and absorbing it and learning it. And then each degree you add to what you previously learned. So by the time you've got to the master of the lodge, you're sitting in the east. Masters always sit in the east. They control the lodge with a gavel. And so at that point now, you've learned pretty much not only the part of the master in the east, you know all the other parts. It's like being in a play and not only knowing your own part, but knowing the parts of all the other actors. So it might take you 2 hours. When I was in the east, it would typically take us, like if we were going to do an initiation, or a degree work, it would typically take us about 2 hours.
Is there a dark side to this secret society, or no? Is there a?
I've never seen a dark side. I don't know what there's claims that are just, to me, just total nonsense. Here's the thing: when you had, at its peak, there was like 5 million Masons in America. Now this is probably in post World War II into the 50s and all of that, before television and, certainly before the internet and all of that. But, you get something that big with that many members, you're going to find, not everybody's going to be a sterling individual. Just like any organization.
Got it.
You know that.
Yeah.
Now,
sure.
I point out that, there was 14 presidents that were Freemasons.
That's a lot of power.
Excuse me?
That's a lot of power.
Yeah.
I mean, so for me, here's what I'd be curious with. If 14 have become president. By the way, I looked at what other 33rd degree they had. It's between Ford and Truman. Truman was also a 33rd
I would believe that,
degree. Yeah. And is there an element of unity where Freemasons defend each other, back each other up, and help them move to the higher rankings of different industries? Is that a part of a vision that's privately discussed?
Let me put it this way. If you've got somebody who's been through the ranks of Freemasons, just like if you were, you had a buddy from the military.
Sure.
And you knew that they had that they were disciplined, that they could get the job done,
Sure.
that they had proven themselves, you would definitely be inclined to, hire them or to, you partner with them or whatever, right? Because you've already seen that somewhere within the social sphere, they have proven themselves. It's really very much like that. If you had worked in a corporation, if you had started a corporation with somebody and you had built it up and you knew their work ethic and you knew their discipline and you knew that they were, had, let's say, extracurricular activities such as being involved with charitable organizations. Now, Freemasonry, I should mention, I haven't seen the latest statistics before COVID. A lot of the older lodges went under during COVID. But you go back a couple of decades ago, and on average, Freemasons were raising $1 million a day for charitable, and mostly going towards causes. You ever heard of the Scottish Rite Hospital for crippled and burned children? Yeah, that's totally a Masonic charity. They have eye banks for children. They have children's homes if you've got children that do not have parents or whatever. Our lodge, we would regularly 3 to 4 times a year, we would have fundraising that all went to charity. There's the Masonic home in Macon, Georgia, and I've met some fine young men and women that were raised in that environment, who are now themselves Freemasons and helping to raise money. But yeah, it's a huge charitable organization, and a lot of people are surprised. You showed us look of surprise on your face because it's not really known. They don't advertise that.
No, that's